You are listening to the Hello Sport Podcast.
What is up, punters and dribblers? Welcome back to another episode of All Talk with Tom and Eddie from the Hello Sport Podcast. And we're back yarning. We're back yarning this week with a rugby league legend, a rugby union legend, unfortunately, Queensland Origin legend, the one and only Matty Rogers. Was very excited for this yarn. And we sort of speak about it a little bit in there, Ed, but like he is, for us, like he was a legend of our youth, right? Where you looked 100%. Up to someone and they were like godly and they were older than you. Now it's like you see a fucking 25-year-old killing it. You're like, I'm really like, I can't idolize Reece Walsh.
No.
I can be impressed by his physical attributes and how hot he is.
Yes. Matty Rogers came along at just the right time, at least for me. That's when I was really loving my rugby union.
Yep.
I was frothing on it. And the Wallabies were great. We'd won 5 bleds in a row, 6 bleds in a row. Obviously, the World Cup happened. We don't talk about that. But Matty Rogers is a big part of that, right? He was around in that era. And for me, was always one of the cool cats. So to be able to sit down and yarn with a cool cat of our era, of our vintage, Tom.
Yep.
What an honour.
What an honour. Punters and dribblers, here is Matty Rogers. Thank you very much for coming on. It's
cool.
It's an honour. It's an honour and a privilege.
Pleasure.
We've been big fans of yours. You were, one of the great players of our, when you were a kid, when you really sort of idolised players and looked up to players, you were one of those guys back in the day. How do you look back on your career as now, what are you, 47 or something? Sorry to bring that up, but how do you look back on those times and reflect as an old boy?
Oh, mate, I don't really. I mean, when certain things come up, we've got the Bledisloe Cup coming up, so everybody sort of harks back to 21 years ago, the last time we won it, and I normally get dragged out and. It's not a bad junket, actually. Maybe I should hope that the Wallabies never win it again, and I'll keep getting the call up. But I've got to be honest. I don't really reflect too much. I'm sitting in a room at my house now, and I've got a lot of jerseys on the walls that sort of give me a lot of fond memories. I've got a few of my dad's jerseys up and stuff, and it's pretty cool. I feel privileged to have had the career I had, and it's always nice when you meet a fan who comes up and says, "Oh, I loved watching you," or "I supported, the Sharks because of you." I was at Henson Park on the weekend watching Newtown play at the beer, footy and food festival, and there was about 15,000 people there, and a lot of old Sharkies fans, talking about the old times. So there's times when it pops up, but I don't sort of sit back and think, "Oh, gee, I was good," it's sort of, or I'm just grateful. I'm just grateful for the opportunity.
Can you tell a rugby union fan as opposed to a rugby league fan when they're coming up to say g'day? Can you spot them a mile away? Where you go, "Oh fuck, there's some RMs on that bloke. He's probably coming to talk about rugby union as opposed to rugby league."
Yeah, you certainly know the difference. There's a different style of fan. My wife, when I met my wife, she I was playing for the Waratahs, and I invited her to a game, and she came along with a few of her girlfriends, and they got all dressed up, and they went into sort of like a private suite, and then we had the reception after the game in the SCG members, and it was it was pretty posh, it was pretty nice, and then we started travelling around the world, and she'd come to test match at Twickenham, and the post match function. There's Prince Harry and Prince William, and they'd say good day, and it was just sort of like part and parcel of her introduction to sporting life. And she wasn't into sport at all. And then I brought her back to rugby league, and she said, "It's like you've taken me from Randwick in the members to the Dapto Dogs. Like, what have you done to me?" So it's certainly a bit different, but. Very passionate fans of rugby league fans.
Yeah, big time.
They sure are. You were mentioning just before we started that Manly got the win over the Sharkies. Are they still close to your heart, the Sharks, or are you more of a Titans man now?
Oh no, I'm a Shark. You can see up the top there. It's my old man's Dally M jersey from 1981. I believe black, white, and blue, mate. I love the Titans. Don't get me wrong. I mean, but given the history of my family, and sort of grew up running around on Shark Park as a from when I can remember, chasing Dad and the footy around. I went back down to Shark Park on the weekend. It was really nostalgic. They asked me to speak to the team before the Steve Rogers Cup that they play against Manly. Obviously, it had no effect whatsoever. They didn't ask me back next year. They had the worst first 40 minutes they've had all year. But when I went out onto the field, before I talked to the team on the Friday, Wade Graham was out there, and he had his 2 little boys running around on the field with him. And it just took me back to being that little 4-year-old and the dream of playing for the Sharks and following in my dad's footsteps. So it was a pretty special few days to be down there and around the Sharks in what is to my family an incredibly special game. But yeah, as a kid that dreamt of playing for the Sharks, it's hard to then to go, I played for the Titans for a few years and now I want to be a Titan. I do feel like the Gold Coast is home though. I grew up, I left the Titans. I left Sydney when I was very young, so I was about sort of 9 years old, and I spent all my formative years in Queensland. Grew up in Queensland, and in those years that you just really remember, running amok as a teenager, and so the opportunity to come back and play for him was great, and now live here and have done for the last 18 years with my wife and kids. So it's been great.
You're talking about the dream to play for the Sharks, and obviously your old man's career doesn't need to sort of be explained. He was a legend of the game. What's it like chasing that dream that is it like, and being in the shadows of your old man when you're trying to do it? Did it feel like there was extra pressure on you to do so? Did you feel that pressure, or was it just was footy always, I guess, were you allowed to just enjoy the game as opposed to feeling like, holy shit, I want to do it because Dad's done it?
I was desperate to do it. I'll tell you, my old man didn't have too much input on my career as a kid. He was pretty busy, and he was a bit of a lad, so he enjoyed his time with the boys. And to be honest, I reckon he probably came and watched me play half a dozen times. It was just the way it was.
Okay.
But I was desperate to get his attention, so I was all about trying to play well, so he'd give me that attention. It was quite a bizarre sort of setup, but at the end, I just wanted it really bad. So, I didn't feel the pressure. What I felt people knew who I was when I'd rock up to footy games as a kid. But I thrived on it. I really embraced it and thought, yep, I am Steve Rogers' son, and you'll see, And it wasn't anything that put me off. But I'll tell you this: as a kid, I researched a lot of I just loved footy, so I researched a lot of players, and I had a lot of favourite players, and what I did research was how many father and sons have done really well, or has a son ever been as big as his dad, and I just found that no one had, and that did worry me, and I'm thinking, wow, maybe it's not meant to happen that way, but I was determined to sort of try to. I mean, I never reached the heights of my old man in rugby league, to captain Australia and win the Dally M. It's a pretty special honour, and obviously had the talent to do that. I never reached those heights, but I feel like I sort of got reasonably close.
Absolutely.
Steve Rogers was, in my opinion, should be an immortal, but probably not having that premiership next to his name is probably the thing that held him back on that front.
When it came to State of Origin, how did that go down with the old man? Because
that was a bit of a fuck you to Dad, wasn't it?
Yeah, get that up, the old man. No, I'll tell you how it happened. So Wayne Bennett. So I'd played for Queensland my whole life, right? So I'd played under 12s, under 15s, open school boys, all for Queensland, and I felt like that was who I was. What a lot of people don't realise is my old man grew up in Queensland too. So he played his first grade game for the Gold Coast Tigers, which is now the Southport Tigers. Played in the centres in 1972 when the Gold Coast Tigers won the premiership. Outside him was a sprightly young flying winger by the name of Clive Palmer. he's
Not.
sprightly anymore,
Wait, is that the Clive Palmer?
Yeah,
Clive Palmer?
yeah.
No way.
So he's whacked him on.
Oh, well, yeah.
He's whacked him on.
He's let it go. He's let himself go.
Yeah.
Whoa, I did not know that.
No.
Yeah, so my old man as a 16-year-old was playing first grade for up here in Queensland. And my grandfather, he actually was a big St George fan. My uncle, my dad's brother, who's about 12 years older than my dad, got signed to play for St George. And he went away to Vietnam and came back not the same, and unfortunately took his life, and it was a horrible story. My old man and my grandfather was a big St George man, and he took my dad at the end of that season. My dad had met my mum, and my grandfather said, I want to take you to Sydney. And Dad didn't want to go because he didn't want to leave my mum. They were 17 years old at the time, and my grandfather said, I'm taking you. So my mum and dad ran away. They sort of basically ran off, and they couldn't be found. And my grandfather found my dad and said, I've got to get you to Sydney, mate. There's an opportunity for you. And he said, well, I'm not going if I can't take my wife. I can't take Carol. And he said, well, you're not married. He goes, well, I'll marry her on my 18th birthday, and and I'll go to Sydney then. So they did. They got married on my dad's 18th birthday, and they went to Sydney. It was the day after my dad's birthday. They weren't allowed to get married on his birthday, so they got married the day after my dad's 18th birthday. My mum was a born and bred Gold Coast girl. She was one of 13 kids. So I've got about 4,000 cousins in Queensland. When the opportunity came around to play for Queensland, well, when State of Origin first started, the reality was my old man should have played for Queensland, given the fact that he played his first grade and stuff like that.
Yeah, so he's actually the problem here,
Wayne
not
Bennett
you.
So Wayne Bennett called me, and he knew the whole story. He knew my family history, obviously, and he asked me, who I'm going to play for, and I just sort of said, well, I didn't think I had a choice because Dad played for New South Wales. I thought I was going to be forced to play for New South Wales. And he said, no, mate, that's not the case. He goes, you've got a choice. And he goes, and if you want to play for Queensland, I'll pick you now. And this was 2 weeks before Queensland, before the Origin sides were going to be picked. So I'm like, oh, that sounds good. He said, don't tell me now. And out of respect to my family, like Wayne said, don't tell me now. Ring your dad and ask your dad. So I rang Dad and I said, Dad, Wayne Bennett rang me and he wants me to play for Queensland. And he goes, well, why wouldn't you? He goes, you've never played. So you've played for Queensland your whole life. He goes, your mum will be over the moon that she can actually support the state where she grew up and all your family's up there. And so I'm like, yeah, you're right. I should play for Queensland. That's where my heart is. And I rang Wayne back and I said, I'm in. And he said to me, he said, right. He goes, well, you're in the side. He said, unless I hear about it from someone else. So I'm a 21-year-old kid, just been told I'm in the Queensland side and I've got to keep it quiet for 2 weeks. The person I was worried about the most was the old man. I'm like, he's going to screw this. He's going to screw this for me. He was the CEO of Kangaroos at the time. He's going to tell someone. Wayne Bennett's going to find out about it. He's not going to pick me, and then New South Wales will never pick me. So, it was a nerve-wracking 2 weeks, but we made it, and I ended up playing for Queensland, which was amazing. So I actually remember I didn't tell Mum, and I told Dad not to tell Mum because I wanted to go and see her and tell her that I was going to play for Queensland. And mate, my mum, she had cancer at the time, so she was sick. And for her to hear me tell her I was going to play for Queensland, she just broke down in tears. It was a pretty special time. So it's something that I if you ask me to do it again, there's not even a second thought in my mind. It's I'm playing for Queensland every day of the week.
Yeah, that's awesome. That must have been a wonderful thing to be able to experience, to be able to have.
Yeah, I mean to play. I mean my first game was at the old Lang Park, in 1999. To play Origin there, and we won the game 9-8, and I kicked a winning field goal, so it was sort of it was pretty cool experience.
How old were you then?
I think I was 22, maybe.
Shit, that's pretty hectic, hey? Kicking the winning field goal at 22 years old.
Would have been 23.
23.
Yeah, it was it was insane. Like you think you sort of can handle it all. It got to the point, I remember coming back from the game, and the pilot of the plane was a Queenslander, and I had to fly back to Sydney, obviously. and he invited me up to sit in the cockpit and fly with him and stuff. And I'm like, got the controls of this jet with 200 people behind me. He's like, you can do it, mate. You can handle this. You can handle Origin. that was before the days of not allowed in the cockpits and stuff like that. So it was insane. I've got to tell you. But it just went on for weeks, and I was just like, no more. I had to tell the press guy at the Sharks, I don't want to speak to anyone anymore. Like, it's too much, it knocked me around a bit.
Unbelievable. So, when did rugby union come knocking on your door, and how did that all go down?
After the 2000 Rugby League World Cup, I knew Wendell was going over, and I had this sort of. I'll tell you this: if rugby union was professional in 1994, I don't think I would have ever played rugby league. I played Australian schoolboys in 1993. I loved playing rugby. Had the best 4 years at boarding school at TSS. Had the best bunch of mates. I'd experienced what rugby had to offer. I'd travelled around the world and playing rugby, and I just really enjoyed it. Come end of 1993, I had no offers on the table at all from any rugby league clubs because I was off the radar. There was no social media like there is today. And I didn't have a manager, and I was just sort of, playing rugby, doing my thing. And I actually had my first 15 coach, a guy named Gary Nusifora. He's an absolute champion of a bloke. He goes, what are you going to do? He goes, are you going to have a crack at league, or do you want to stay in rugby? I said, I want to stay in rugby. So he took me around to a few clubs, and I think up in Brisbane, and it was a pretty standard response to every meeting. Because I always thought, they say it's amateur, but I think they're going to pay people. I think there's some stuff going on behind the scenes, and every club I went to, it was like, we really want you to come play at our club. Obviously, we can't offer you any money, but, we can certainly help find you a job. What do you like to do? And I'm like, oh, wow, this isn't going the way I wanted. I ended up agreeing to internally, I'd agreed to go and play for GPS in Brisbane, Jeeps, and it seemed like a really good club, and I was keen to go and play there. A few mates that I played for Queensland with were going there. So I thought, yep, that's where I'm going to head. And then, I don't think I'd told them that at this stage. I just sort of like internally sort of thought, yep, that's what I'm going to do. And then Tommy Bishop, ex-Cronulla, captain coach in 73, is the one that graded my dad, out of respect for my dad. So Mum and Dad were living in Darwin at the time, and Tommy Bishop would come and watch. Because Dad didn't want to speak to any rugby people because he didn't like the game, and he wanted to speak to someone he trusted to see if I was going all right. So he'd speak to Tommy Bishop, and Tommy was hard as a coffin nail, mate. He was tough, and I'd play pretty well, and he'd go, mate, you missed this tackle, and you got to. And I'm like, right. So he'd speak to Dad, and anyway, after all this had sort of gone down, Tommy and Dad were speaking, and Tommy said to Dad, "Is he going to Cronulla?" And Dad said, no, they haven't spoke to him. And he goes, have you spoken to Cronulla? He goes, no, I haven't spoken to Cronulla. And he goes, well, I'm going to ring him. So Tommy rang Cronulla and said, mate, what are you doing with Sludge's boy? And they said, oh, well, where is he? What's he doing? He goes, mate, he just played for the Australian schoolboys in rugby. I think he'd love to come back to the Sharks. Yeah, so Tommy Bishop called the Sharks, and he just basically said, what are you doing with Sludge's boy? And Sludge is my dad, obviously. And
yep.
And they said, oh, we don't know. And he said, well, he's just played for Australian schoolboys. You should try and get him back to the Sharks. So they gave my dad a call, and then Dad called me, and he made a deal with them for both myself. But the kicker was when Dad, because I was still pretty keen to stay in rugby. But the kicker was that he said, mate, and they've signed your brother too, Don. So they're going to take you both down to Cronulla for the 1994 season. So that was like, yeah, I'm in. I'm all in.
Punters and Dribblers, the podcast this week brought to you by our good friends at Ned's. Now, they want us to let you know that you can win a UFC 293 Ned's level experience for you and three mates. That UFC 293 is in Sydney, for those of you that don't know. The prize includes 4 VIP tickets, dinner cruise, flights and accommodation, transport for the weekend. It truly is, Eddie, the ultimate dribbler experience.
That's unbelievable. Imagine getting a dinner cruise out to the Biffs. Fucking oath.
Yes,
Or maybe
please.
the dinner cruise is on the way back. Probably
Who cares, dude?
Who
Just
cares?
a cruise with some food.
Just a cruise. You can't beat it. So head to www.neds.com.au/UFC-competition. It's not a dash. Was that a dash?
Yeah.
What's that?
It's a dash.
It's a dash. Now,
Hyphen dash.
Dash, hyphen, dash.
hyphen dash, you get the drill.
New South Wales permit number NTP/06995. ACT permit number 23/01138.
Excludes South Australia. Eligibility requirements do apply. T's and C's apply and available on website.
What are you really gambling with? For free and confidential support, call the number on screen or visit the website.
Yeah, so the kicker of the deal was that my brother got signed too. He was playing up in Darwin at the time in the first grade comp up there, and just won the premiership. And he was 20. He got an opportunity to come down and play under 21s in '94 in the President's Cup team for the Cronulla Sharks. So yeah, it was a. I'd never played with my brother. Obviously, being a few years older than me, so the opportunity to go and play with him was sort of too good an opportunity to pass up.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds.
But what I'll say is, I still harboured those desires to sort of go back and play rugby, and watching my teammates that I'd played, Queensland and Australian schoolboys with succeed on the rugby field, just gave me that desire to want to go back there. And I didn't think it was sort of possible. And then Wendell told me he was going to rugby, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. So the opportunity sort of came up through me actually reaching out to Rugby Australia.
Ah, okay, interesting. I do want to keep going on the rugby train, but I just wanted to quickly ask, because like you come into into professional sport, right? And you're doing professional rugby league, and then how long is it before you're sort of thrown into the chaos of Super League? Like, you're not long into your professional career, right? Before you're getting before this whole shitstorm starts.
I'm one game in.
Oh my God!
Yeah, I was one game in.
One game.
I had one game of NRL, or ARL it was back then, and the second, I think it was round 2, we played in WA, and yeah, we got picked up off the field, straight up the race at the Wacker, straight past the dressing room door, out the back, and there was a bus waiting. Our bags were on the bus. We were told we're not going to the dressing room, and we thought, yeah, how good's this? Like, I know we just beat, we beat the Western Reds. It wasn't like we beat the reigning premiers. So I thought this is a pretty decent sort of celebration for beating the Reds. Your trouble with rugby league back in those days, you're staying at the Flag Inn or the local motor inn. You're not staying in Sofotels and nice hotels. So we ended up going to the Sofitel in the middle of Perth. Go in there. They've got room keys with us, our own rooms, so we couldn't talk to anybody. So it's like go to your room, get dressed, and come down to this function room, which is like on level 2 or whatever. And so we all sort of go and get showered, and we're thinking, oh man, it's a party, let's go, we celebrate, And we go down there and we walk into the room. It's big round tables, and in the middle there's big tub of those big silver tubs full of ice and beers. And mate, we're all making stuff all, so we're all like thinking, how good's this? And the club's putting beers on and stuff, and then it starts, and then Ken Cowley and Shane Richardson come out and give us the spiel of what Super League's going to be, and Rupert Murdoch's starting a new league, and the Sharks have agreed to participate in that new league. We as players don't have to go, but that's what the Sharks are doing. So it's up to us. They'll negotiate a new contract with us if we want, and then ET got up. ET and Les Davidson, our 2 senior players who'd already signed with Super League, unbeknownst to us, and gave us their spiel about what they're going to do. And I was. What was I? It was 95, so I was 19 years old, and I'm thinking, what is going on? Like, I just want to play for the Sharks. It's I'd worked my butt off for 12 months there trying to get to first grade. I'd finally made it, and then one by one they took us into a room next door, And, by the time I got in there, I was 6 beers deep. I was so lightweight, so I was blind. But I'm struggling to focus on the people talking to me, let alone the contract they put inside in front of me. And, they offered me, I think I was on 40 grand at the time. They offered me 100 grand for the next year, 120 and then 140, escalating. And they put it in front of me. And like I'm on 40 at the time. So I'm like thinking, and this is back in, start of 95. So it's decent money.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, wow, what's happening here? Like, and then the kicker was, if you sign, like this deal will be on the table for you tomorrow. But if you sign it now, here's this check. And they held out this check for me and it's made out to me for 25 grand.
Oh.
I was on 40. So it's more than half of what I was on. And I'm just sitting there and I'm trying to ring my old man. And my old man's in Darwin. Like, he's running the league up there. And like, he was out on the piss with his mates. So he's like not taking my call. And I'm like, what do I do? So I just signed. I'm like, stuff it. I'm signing. I'm going 25 grand. My old man, like, we get on a plane and we fly back the next day. And there's just like, the media at the airport was insane. Like, it was unbelievable because we were like one of the first teams that had signed. I think it was us and the Warriors. And they'd got us all super cheap for what they were expecting based on, the response from the Australian Rugby League. And my old man was ropeable that I'd signed. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, Dad, I've just tripled my money. Like, what are you talking about? How, like, as if you wouldn't have signed it. And he was filthy. Like, we were really good mates. Like, Dad was only young at the time. Dad was about 40 at the time. So he was a young dad. And he knew the game and he knew that the ARL weren't going to stand for it. So he was like, nah, I'm not having it. And he was filthy on the Sharks for not including him in what they'd done with his son. So he goes, we're going to the ARL. You're going to meet with the ARL. I said, Dad, I don't want to. I want to play with the Sharks. He goes, no, you're going to meet with the ARL. I'm not going to stand for what they've done. And Dad could be a pretty sort of dominating figure in my life. So I was like, all right, I'll go. So I go in and have this meeting and I'm sitting in the ARL and Frank Stanton, who I was terrified of because my old man was coached by him as a kid and all I can remember Dad calling him was Cranky Frankie. So I'm like terrified of Frank Stanton. So I'm going to this meeting and I'm sitting with Frank Stanton and Frank rings my dad on speakerphone. So Dad's in the meeting from Darwin on speakerphone. I'm sitting there with Frank, and Frank tells me, tells Dad, look, we'll guarantee the money that he's been offered, if he comes back to the ARL. But if I come back to the ARL, I can't play for the Sharks because the Sharks are going to Super League. So I didn't want to do it. And I'll never forget, like, sitting in this negotiation room and Frank Stanton leaving and me being on the phone with Dad and me saying to Dad, I don't want to go back to the ARL and play for another club. I want to play for the Sharks. He goes, don't worry, mate. He goes, there's some really nice places to live out at Parramatta. And I was...
That's why. And again, this is you've played one game of NRL here, right? Like, is this is
one game?
That is
one
insane.
Game. And So how's this for negotiation skills? My old man negotiates a deal for me that's the same that I've got, the same, not more, the same that I've got at a place where I want to be for a club, to go to a club where I don't want to be for the same money. It's like, at least get me more money if you're going to send me to Parramatta or send me to somewhere else. And it didn't. And then Frank left, and they said the deal was done. Like, I'm sitting there thinking, do I get a say in this? Frank walks out of the room and Dad's like, all right, we're all good. They're going to draw up the deal and we're going to sign. Dad hangs up the phone. Frank walks out of the room. Gus Gould walks in. And Gus sees me and he's sort of shocked to see me sitting there.
Yeah,
he's like, what are you doing here? I'm like, my dad just chatted with Frank about me coming back to the ARL. And he goes, what are you talking about? I said, he goes, what did they agree on? I said, he just agreed that they guaranteed the money that Super League had guaranteed me. And I'm like, no. He's like, no. He's like, no. He goes, that's not happening. He goes, we're not guaranteeing anything because there's not going to be a Super League. And I'm like, oh okay. And I just got up and walked out. And it was pretty abrupt, Gus, and you can imagine. So, like, he's a passionate league man, and he was trying to save the game. But I was just a kid, and I was just terrified. Like, I didn't know what to say, and it was pretty upsetting. And I left the meeting, and I got downstairs, got in my car, and I rang Dad, and I said, Dad, I'm staying with the Sharks. I'm not leaving the Sharks. Like, I sort of told him what happened. When Gus came in, he's like, righto. He goes, all right, well, let me call Reeves. So he called John Rebo, and he says to Reeves, my son signed under duress. I'm going to get him out of the contract unless we sit down and we chat again. And he's like, righto, mate. He said, we really want your boy, so let's catch up at Sheraton on the Park for dinner. We'll fly you down. We'll get you in the meeting, and we'll sort something out. To keep your boy at the Sharks. So Ken Cowley, John Rebo, and Peter Mulholland was there as well. For some reason, I'm not sure why. I think it was because they were planning on trying to get my dad down to the Western Reds from Darwin, and Peter Mulholland obviously coached over there. And so they brought. I came into this meeting with Dad. We rock up. I'm sort of nervous as hell, and we walk into the Sheraton on the Park into the restaurant, and we sit down. And no lie, we sit down, and before I'd even touch my water, John Rebo says to my old man, righto, Sludge, let's get the elephant out of the room. What are we going to have to pay to keep a young bloke at the Sharks? And my old man, without even taking a breath, says $250. And literally, Reeves looks at Ken Cowley, and Ken nods his head, and he goes, righto, done. Can we enjoy a good meal now?
Wow. Mate.
And I'm literally 19 years old. Like 2 weeks ago, I'm on 40 grand. And the crazy thing, like my old man and his negotiation skills, right? We walk out, and my old man's kicking himself. He's like, mate, I could have said 500. He probably could have. But remember, a couple of weeks ago, I was on 40, so I'm pretty happy, like. It was, it was a crazy time. It was nuts, eh? Like, some of the stuff that was going on, that you look back on and shake your head and think, geez, Like, I think in the end, like, everybody won, sort of thing. So
yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask. Like, but do you look back on that kind of positively now? Like, in the sense, and I guess that's what you're saying, everyone won. Like, although it was chaos and it was a shit fight, like, it kind of sounds fun. Sounds like it was fun, even though it was a bit sort of cowboy.
It was fun, all right. We were getting limos everywhere, and there was functions laid on, and everyone was trying to woo the players, and it was pretty crazy. And then when we got shut down, I remember going to these meetings with these big player groups, and they're talking about, we're going to run our own competition, and we'll get the referee. I'm just sitting there thinking, someone's on the crack pipe here. Like, there's no way we're running our own competition. We're footballers. Like who's going to run a comp for us? It was crazy. But anyway, it ended up getting going, and that 1 year of turmoil turned into what now is, I think, the best product in Australian sport in terms of, for a TV product. Rugby league is fantastic. So it was a win for everyone.
So, did these outrageous Super League contracts, did they carry through into what is now the NRL, or did you all have to take haircuts after the fun and dance was over?
Oh, no, it never went backwards. The limo rides stopped, but, we'd always, bitch and moan about the way we were travelling after Super League, because it was like, cab charges and buses. My old man would say, mate, it's not Super League anymore. So, it was pretty crazy. But no, the contracts never went backwards. And that in essence sort of shows that, the players got what they deserved. The game obviously generated the money. So, and the people that were missing out were the players. And prior to that, there was one person winning. It was Kerry Packer. He got the cheapest TV rights deal. He was making a fortune off all the advertising. and the TV rights, and the players were the ones who were the product, were the ones that weren't getting paid what they deserved. So in the end, the players got what they deserved, and I think it's they continue to do so. Like I'm always always for the players, getting it's a hard job, it's. I know people look at it and it looks glamorous, and it is. It's certainly a privilege to be able to play in that space, but it doesn't just happen. I mean, how many people do you know that were guns as kids and like, he would have been great, but but nothing. The guy didn't do the work and he didn't make it because he wasn't good enough. That's why he's not there. If he was good enough to make it, he would have made it. It's hard. It's hard on your body. It's hard on your social life. It's hard on your relationships. It's hard, living in the public eye. There's a lot that goes into being an NRL player. So when people say, they're greedy and they get paid too much, I disagree. I don't think they get paid enough, in terms of what sport generates and what it does for, the human psyche, what it does for the public. I think, I think it's starting to get better, and I think it'll continue to get better. I mean, we're certainly not in the market of an American sports market where you see these ridiculous contracts based on their population and the support of the sport. But I love to see it growing. I love to see the players rewarded for their efforts, and I think we should applaud them for that.
Let's move on from the play thing. I just wanted to quickly, the last thing around Super League, I wanted to ask. As you didn't win that grand final, are you sort of like happy if everyone takes it off the Broncos because it was a split competition, and we will also take it off the Newcastle Knights? Like we both had it was a fuck time for all of us. I'm happy just to wipe those two premierships from the record books.
Wipe the year completely.
Yeah.
You know what? As much as I'm a shark. I do have a soft spot for Newcastle, the way that they get behind their fans. I just and the fact that they beat Manly, I'm happy to cop the loss.
Sorry, mate, we lost you, but I did hear you basically say that you didn't want to wipe it because you like Newcastle, and I guess I would just say to that, it's been lovely to talk to you, but I'm going to end the interview right here. Let's wrap it up. I'm dirty at you.
Well, mate, I've got to say, I'm one of the many rugby league fans that support their team and then anyone else who's playing Manly. So particularly the fact that Cronulla lost to Manly twice in the 70s and my old man played in the grand final. So I wouldn't want to take it off Newcastle just for the fact that it was Manly that they beat.
Yeah. Well, that is fair. I'm loath to remind you of the score on the weekend, Matt, but I will do that anyway. Do you want to get back into rugby union, Ed?
And it continues.
Let's get back into rugby union, Matt, if we can. I wanted to ask a personal question. What's it like drinking a beer out of the Bledisloe Cup?
It's hard. It is hard because it's very wide. So when you pour it up, it tends to all go on your shoulders and a little bit in your mouth. So, mate, it's a big thing. We tried to fit George Gregan in it. We almost got him completely in. But, there was one piece hanging out, and it's very big on George, so we couldn't get that in.
Yeah, we've heard about that.
I'll let you guess what that is.
Yeah, no, that story's done the round.
Yeah, the old kickstand.
Yeah.
But on the Bledisloe Cup,
45-degree angle.
What do you reckon you would have said if someone had said to you and the boys after 2002 that by 2023 we still haven't won it again?
I wouldn't have believed it. But yeah, I mean, look, the way things are going, there needs some significant change for it not to be another 20 years. So, New Zealand are just a powerhouse, and we went through an era where, we had some phenomenal talent in our team. You look at the likes of, like, some of these players that are going to be, the best evers, your Johnny Hills, your Matt Burks, your Todd Ikefus, your Steve Larkins, the core of that side, the George Gregans, the core of that side was a pretty unique bunch of talent. And, I was just fortunate enough to be a part of that group for a small period of time. but yeah, I think they got the right man at the helm to wrestle it back. It's going to take some time. If there's one thing that Eddie Jones can do, it's create an upset in world rugby. I mean, he got Japan to beat South Africa. Like that. I mean, that's unique, right? I mean, that's a bigger upset than Australia beating New Zealand. So I think they got the right guy at the helm. It's going to take a little bit of time. He's still trying to work out who his team, who he can use, who he needs, where he needs to fill some gaps. Unfortunately, he's got to do it on the world stage because there's no other place to do it when you're the Australian coach. So there's going to be a few teething issues early, but I'm happy with the guy that's running the show.
Have you found it difficult to maintain an interest in rugby union, given its sort of unfortunate descent into a little bit of irrelevance in the sort of general sporting psyche in Australia?
It has been tough, I've got to say, and the fact that they chuck the game behind a paywall makes it even tougher because it's like, well, do I want to pay to watch it? Like, is it worth paying to watch it on TV at the moment? Look, I know the guys that I've visited Wallaby camp, and I'm in touch with people that are well and truly engrossed in the game. Phil Ward, the new CEO, is a great mate of mine. I'm going down to Melbourne to watch the game this weekend. They've got some work to do. There's no question. But I feel like what they're doing is smart in relation to bringing back your Will Skeltons and your Richie Arnolds from the French league to play over here. I feel like they're making some decisions that's going to make our national side stronger. The reality is, the players that play over in those leagues over in France, in the UK, they're tough week in, week out competitions. We sort of lack that a little bit in Australia. And if we just say that everyone's got to play in Australia if you're going to play for the Wallabies, means we're going to have players that aren't as battle-hardened and ready to play on the world stage. So I'm happy with them relaxing the laws. I think they're starting to make some decisions to bring our Wallabies back to a dominant nation. I think we're 8th at the moment in the world on the rankings, which is not ideal. It's probably the worst we've been ever. But I feel like they're making the right decisions to turn that around. And look, the ultimate marketing ploy for any team is win. Well, that's it. Like, you win, no one cares what else you do. If you win, people want to start to watch you. Yeah. People want to get behind you and they want to cheer their national team. So they just got to start winning games. Doesn't matter how they do it. You got to push the barrier. I mean, if you're not, on the edge of cheating, like you maybe even stepping over the line a little bit, you got to find a way to win. Like, that's the reality of it. I'm not saying go out there and cheat, but you got to be right on the edge on everything. You got to push your. Yeah, well, you got to push. You got to. I mean, far out. It doesn't happen just by being the nice guy and getting the job done. I mean, Richie McCaw, one of the greatest open side flankers to ever play the game. He's the loveliest human being, but he lived his footballing life on the edge of what's legal and what's not legal, and got called out by people saying, "Oh, he cheats." Well, mate, no, he's just living on the edge, and that's where you got to be if you want to compete. And us as Australians need to live on that edge and give ourselves the opportunity.
We sort of have a little bit of a different take here at Hello Sport. We're of the strong opinion, Matt, and surely you can agree with this, that in order to win, we need more rugby league players in the side. It's as simple as that. I mean, I'm not ruling out 10-plus rugby league, players coming over for a couple of reasons. They're better footy players, first and foremost, no offence. And secondly, it's bums on seats and it's eyeballs on screens.
Yeah, I'm not ruling out the fact that they need cattle and where do they get that from? I mean, you consider like the two nations that in the southern hemisphere that are strongest in South Africa and New Zealand. Like, that's all they like. Rugby league's its poor second cousin in New Zealand, and rugby league doesn't exist in South Africa. Everybody plays rugby. We've got rugby league and AFL to compete with. I mean, could you imagine if we just had rugby union, how strong it would be? The fact is we don't. So we've got to compete with the other codes. But Eddie will get the players that he wants. I'd love to see Payne Haas playing number 8 for the Wallabies.
Same,
I'd love to
dude.
see,
Same. It'd be so good.
Cameron Murray playing number 12 for the Wallabies. It'd be devastating.
But as a rugby league fan, I'm only just like, stay the fuck away from my Manly players. Don't take Trebojevic. They're looking at Cooler. Like, you can take whoever you want. Because we're rugby fans here. The idea of Payne at number 8, like almost Todai Kefu vibes, where you're just like, yes, please, give me that.
Oh, mate, could you imagine? And look, at the end of the day, rugby people can say we need to develop our own players. And yeah, you do. You absolutely do. And, the GPS school system is a breeding ground for NRL stars. They're all there. But the GPS school system recruit young rugby league players because they don't care about league or union. They just want to win their school competition. And then they leave there and they go and they're prepared for a professional system to go back into rugby league. And there's not as many opportunities in rugby union in Australia. There's only 4 sides, professional sides, and then there's the Wallabies, and rugby league has so much more to offer in terms of opportunity. So they do tend to have to come and buy them back at a higher rate than what they would if they developed their own. But if they want success now, which they're screaming for because we haven't had it for so long, they're going to have to spend some money, and they're going to have to go and get the Payne Husses. They're going to have to go and get the Cam Murrays or the Angus Crichtons of the world who have got rugby backgrounds, who came through a rugby system, who won't take long to jump back into that program.
Yeah, definitely. Just quickly, because we sort of, I think the last little cutoff we had, or the main one where we had to stop for a second, but you had just started talking about how you approached rugby yourself. What was the reasoning behind that? Were you sick of rugby league, or did you always want to, once rugby had gone professional, we'd won the World Cup, like did you just have that rugby union itch that you wanted to scratch?
I had an itch to scratch. There's definitely, that's why I approached rugby, but there was also a little bit behind where I was playing at the time. Like I was playing on the wing for the Sharks. I was a fly half in rugby union, so I played Australian schoolboys at fly half, and now I'm playing on the wing. And I just knew I had more to offer a football team than being on the wing, and I got a bit sick of just carting the ball into a line of forwards off kick returns. I knew I had more to offer, and I spoke to Chris Anderson, and he was the incoming coach at the Sharks, and my contract was up. And I said to my dad, I want to speak to Opes before I sign anything. And to Opes' credit, like I just said to him, I said, mate, if I stay here, where are you going to play me? I said, because I don't want to play on the wing. And he goes, mate, if you stay here, he goes, you're one of the best wingers in the country. He said, I'm not going to move you. Like, that's where I want you, So I just decided pretty much then and there I wasn't going to be playing for the Sharks because I knew I had more to offer. So I had to and rugby was a great alternative. I didn't really want to play against the Sharks at the time. Like I really loved the Sharks. My dad was the boss there. I didn't want to go to another club. Rugby, a friend of mine named John Dunphy, who he acted sort of as a quasi agent for me because I didn't have one. I said, can you speak to Rugby Australia? So he got him into a meeting, and Jeff Miller just put all the cards on the table, and there were a lot of cards, the money, the travel, the opportunity to play in a different position. So yeah, at that point, I basically in my mind agreed that I'm going back to rugby. Dumpy said, "Do you want me to talk about money?" I said, I just knew and I don't want to sound arrogant. I just knew I was going to get paid wherever I went. Like if I stayed at the Sharks, I was going to make good money. If I went to rugby, I was going to make good money. I was in a position in my career where money wasn't really the issue. It was like, what do I want to do? And the rugby thing looked very attractive. So to go back there and I met with Eddie Jones. I met with Bob Dwyer. They didn't want me to go to Queensland because Wendell was in Queensland. So Eddie was the Brumbies coach. Bob was the New South Wales coach. I really connected with Bob Dwyer. He sort of had some ideas around where I'd play. He wanted me to play fullback. I knew they had Matt Burke there. So I'm like, mate, you've got the best fullback Australia's ever had at fullback at the Waratahs. How are you going to make this work? He goes, no, I'll speak to Berkey. I think he'd make a great outside centre, and I think fullback's your position. And Berkey to his credit, it was all about the team. He said, mate, I'm happy to move to 13. He goes, you can play fullback, I'll teach you. And he took me under his wing. Eddie was a bit aloof when I met with him about the Brumbies because he knew he was taking the Wallabies job, so he couldn't talk too much about what was going to happen at the Brumbies. So it was just an easy fit for me to go to the Waratahs. But yeah, it was, in the end, I did this whole sort of around the world thing to get back to rugby league playing 5'8", where I wanted to play initially. And the thing that pissed me off the most was I played South for the Titans, and I played 5'8", and we ended up winning the game. And John Lang was the coach at the time, who was the guy that put me on the wing and wouldn't take me off the wing at Cronulla. And I love Langy, and but he came in after the game. He said, mate, I made a huge mistake. He goes, I should never have kept you out there. He goes, after what I saw tonight, you should have been playing 5'8", 15 years ago at Cronulla. And I'm like, thanks, mate, but that doesn't help me. The fact that I've had to, if I was playing 5'8" at the Sharks, I probably never have left. So yeah. But the rugby opportunity was huge for me. I loved it, and it gave me certainly a different lifestyle. Met the very different fans of rugby to the rugby league fans, and I guess my wife got to experience rugby fans as opposed to league fans initially. Not that I don't like league fans are great.
No, of course.
But they're a very different crowd.
Did you see, we were just talking about this on the podcast yesterday, RM Williams, and we can cut this out if they're a sponsor of yours, Matt, but RM Williams are selling a rugby ball online. It's vintage for $1,000, just to give you a little insight into their sort of finger on the pulse vibe of like what the average Australian's into. RM Williams selling a $1,000 vintage football.
Yeah, wow. Mate, it doesn't matter what
you got any interest in buying it?
Yeah, no, I don't. One thing that I know, if any football ends up in my house, regardless of whose signature's on it, where it comes from, how much it costs, it ends up getting kicked around in the backyard, left out there, the dog chews it. So that $1,000 football will be no good for me, I can assure you of that.
You also you had a few boys come with you to rugby union, in terms of you had Dell and Lottie at the same time. Did you know they were all coming? Did you guys did you speak to them? What was that like?
I didn't know that Dell was coming over. I knew Dell was going over. He'd signed before me. But I sort of I was involved in the recruitment a lot. He was sort of and ahhing where to go, and in terms of coming to the Waratahs, I mean. So yeah, he came over a year later. But I just really wanted to get into the Waratahs because I knew he'd be a great asset to the team. But to have those two guys with us over there, it's funny. The fans were pretty receptive to us. But I felt like at times, the admin wasn't. The admin sort of, they were happy to have us over there to get the eyeballs on rugby, and, it was good for them in relation to that. But I honestly, there were times when I'd been in Wallaby functions and, I felt, and I'd been out, I'd be in a Wallaby function after a game and feel like, I was sort of like the redheaded stepchild of rugby, I was sort of on the outer. But then I'd go back to a Sharks game, and I'd been gone for 3 years, and go back to a Sharks game and felt like, I was so welcome, and that was home. It was different. I left rugby. I left rugby league. The tribalism just really got to me. Being, Matt Rogers. It's a number of reasons, but being Matt Rogers, Steve Rogers' son, living in Cronulla. It was like a real fishbowl, and it was so intense. Cronulla's, probably a bit like Manly, they're just all about their team. Everybody plays footy. Everyone wants to play for the Sharks, and it just became a little bit much. After Mum passed, and it was I just wanted to get away, from that tribalism and that sort of fishbowl mentality. And then when you go to rugby, it sort of lacks that. And then after years of being in rugby, you sort of realise how special rugby league is, to have that tribalism, to have those little pockets of Sydney that are just so all about their team. And then you go onto this world stage and you sort of miss it. And I certainly did. and knowing there's two sides of the fence, and knowing that I had a choice. After 5 years of being in league, it was just, my dad had passed, and I'd been away from you're away from your family for so long. I just wanted to get back to being close to my family. All my family was in Queensland, and I just wanted to get, and my, I wanted to be closer to my wife and kids. You travel 3-4 months a year with rugby, you're away from home. So it's a tough gig. For the guys that do it, like your George Gregans and your James Slippers, 100 plus tests, got the utmost respect for those guys because, it's a tough road. It's not easy.
Mate, we saw a quote from you the other day in regards to what we refer to them as DMCs, dirty merger clubs. So that would be in regards to the West Tigers and the St George Dragons. We see them as sort of almost a little bit inbred, really, as clubs. You were saying that you don't think they'll last. Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, I don't think they can thrive they've just got to get it together. That's the reality of it. It's like you look at both St George Illawarra and the West Tigers at the moment. It's like there's from reports, right? There's two warring factions in there, or the board's not operating efficiently to complement the football club. I think in clubs like that, there's a lot of snouts in the trough, and no one wants to give up their spot at the trough. They're like for the betterment of the club because it's their club, and they're as passionate about the next guy. But sometimes people have got to back away, and for the betterment of the club as a whole, put the right people in the right places, so to speak. I could imagine it being very tough at those clubs, and until they've got someone who can control it all, and they've got, you think of this, right? Look at St George. They had a guy running the club, St George Illawarra, I should say. They had a guy running the club who's probably one of the most astute, one of the greatest coaches ever. He knew what he wanted. He probably got full rein to get what he wanted, and he did it, and they won a comp. He leaves. They've not had someone in there of that stature since, and they just haven't been able to get it together since. Probably too many people trying to pull strings down there. Similar at West Tigers. They had a guy running the club who, one of the most astute coaches in the game, unbelievable football mind, running the club, win a comp. He leaves, and they've never been able to really get it together since. So, I don't know what the answer is, but it seems like, those sort of clubs, I don't know who's calling the shots. I will say this, like with West Tigers, I'm when I listen to Lee Hadjiman-Tallis talk, I feel like that they've made a decision to move in a certain direction, and they're backing that decision. Now, they've been like Pascal and Lee's been there for a while, and maybe if this doesn't work, then they have to fall on their sword and go, all right, well, that was our last roll of the dice and it didn't work. So, but you've got to give it time, right? So the Benji Sheen thing, you've got to give it time. It's not going to happen today. It's probably not going to happen next year. It's probably going to be the year after when they start to get all their pieces in a row, in line. With St George, is, well, they've made their decision now. Their decision is, Shane Flanagan's the guy to turn this ship around. Now, if that doesn't work, it's been just as long, 10, 12 years or whatever since they've had any sort of success. Does the board there or does the CEO there got to fall on the sword and go, all right, well, we made the decision and it was wrong. Like, at what point do you look beyond the coaches and go, it's a club thing, it's not a coach thing? Like but you got to. I mean, with St George, there's been calls for years about the board and this and that and the oust campaign and all that sort of stuff. It's a mess. So I like Flano. Obviously, he coached my beloved Cronulla Sharks to their one and only premiership. He's a very strong personality. I know he's had his issues in the past. He's done his time. I think he could be very good for the St George Dragons. I think he needs a different playing group to get the results that he needs, that he wants. But I think he's a strong personality that can run things. At St George, at West Tigers, they've made their decision. Like, who knows where it's going to be in a couple of years? But they've put it all into Sheens and Benji, with Benji taking over. Is Benji the guy for the job? I don't know. I mean, he's never coached before, so we'll know in a couple of years. And if in a couple of years it hasn't worked, then they need to. I think the powers that be need to maybe step aside and go, right, that was our last throw of the dice, because they can't go, give us another 3 or 5 years.
Well, that's the thing, though, right? Like, the way that the Tigers have done it is by almost concocting this thing that's so bizarre that it's like, we're going to need another 5 years to see whether this thing fucking works. So, like, get off our back for 5 years and then judge us then. It's like
It's genius.
It's genius. They've found a way to buy themselves 5 years of just like, we're going to get a guy that's never coached. We're going to bring back the coach we sacked. And who's now like going to be the scapegoat, but Benji might be coaching behind the scenes. Haji Patelis is on TV wearing a top hat. No one knows what's going on. Like, it's a dastardly plan.
Well, doesn't he?
He does speak well, but he sort of speaks. He speaks well, but like he runs you around in circles a little bit, which I'll get
dizzy.
Yeah, you get a bit dizzy. But I mean, I did enjoy his 360 appearance. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, at least he's fronting up, right?
Yeah,
he's getting in front of the media, and at the end of the day, like, you're not going to turn a struggling, crappy club that's been doing awful for 12 years around in a season, like, unless you're the Roosters. They tend to be able to do it.
Yeah, it's funny how they tend to be able to do it.
Yeah. Buy an immortal.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember in 2009, they got the wooden spoon. In 2010, they made the grand final. So
it's interesting how that happens. It's interesting how that works.
They can work it out,
mate. Look, we really appreciated your time. Apologies for the tech fuck ups. We honestly could have yarned for a bloody long time. We didn't get to a lot of things, but it was great to talk to you. We really appreciate it. And as I said at the start, you're one of the legends of our time growing up, and it's been really nice to have a yarn and have you on.
How old are you blokes?
34 for me.
32 and 34, mate. So you played when the world felt right.
Yeah, we were. I remember sitting on the couch, I think as a 13-year-old, watching Johnny Wilkinson break my fucking heart, but in that World Cup final. But Sharks. It's funny, and I mean, there's no way. I always find it funny when you see people go up to like celebrities and stuff, and they're like, "Oh yeah, do you remember that time I met ya at this random fucking park in like the 90s?" And they're like, "No, I don't." But I did meet you once at the Easter show when I was like 6 years old. And you had peroxide blonde hair and you were with your family. And I'm like, what's up, Matt Rogers?
Do you remember that, mate?
Yeah, do you remember it?
I got a good one the other day. I was walking across my family were up from, my cousins were up from Sydney. And they were staying in the Tallabudgera Creek Caravan Park, a beautiful little park on Tully Creek there. So I took my kids down and anyway, I had to walk across the road to go and get some drinks. And walked across the road, and this car stops in front of me, like holding up traffic. And he goes, "Matty," and I'm like, "Hey, mate." And he goes, "We're friends." And I'm like, I'm looking at him in the car, I'm thinking, how do I know this bloke? And I said, where did I meet you? He goes, "No, on Facebook. We're friends on Facebook." I'm friends with everyone on Facebook, mate. Get away. Oh, mate. Classic.
Oh, Jesus. Dribblers.
Dribblers.
That is gotta love them. Mate, thanks again, man. Again, it was great to chat. And well, screw you then, eh?
Sorry, mate. Yeah.
Thanks for the yarn, mate.
No worries. We can do it again another time if you want to.
Yeah, mate, we'd love to.
Could you two just not talk anymore?